The desert town of Redwater was still shaking the deep sleep from its bones when a lone rider approached the boarding shack huddled at the edge of the dust-choked street. The morning light had barely climbed above the serrated red cliffs, and a thin sheet of alkaline dust drifted across the ground like a deliberate, silent warning. Clara, wrapped tightly in a frayed wool coat that had seen too many cold camps, stood beside the split-wood pile with her 12-year-old son, Eli. They were splitting kindling for the day's meager breakfast fire. They had arrived only 3 nights ago, another anonymous stop in a long, desperate string of temporary shelters stretching back across the years. Clara believed she had successfully outrun everything that might still remember her. Money lenders, unforgiving ranch owners, and a few men with dangerous questions she had no intention of answering. Nothing ever came looking for a woman who moved often and spoke little, which was precisely why her hands froze on the axe handle when the rider called out, "Clara Boone!" His voice was neither hard nor friendly, but simply carried the unmistakable certainty of a man who knew exactly who he was addressing. Clara stiffened, her posture instantly defensive. Eli's small, cold hand tightened around her sleeve. People like them didn't get visitors. Certainly not men wearing crisp, dark coats adorned with brass buttons, and bearing the official seal of the Territorial Probate Office prominently displayed on the breast pocket. The rider dismounted carefully, removing his hat with the practiced, heavy solemnity of a man delivering bad news. "I've been searching for you since spring," he stated, studying her face. "You're difficult to track." Clara's pulse hammered a dull rhythm against her ribs. "That's the point," she thought bitterly. "What do you want?" she asked, stepping slightly in front of Eli, shielding him with her body. The rider withdrew a sealed, heavy envelope from his inner coat. "It concerns your grandfather, Elias Ward." The name struck her like a physical blow from the barrel of a pistol. Elias Ward, the old mountain rancher she hadn't seen since she was 16. A man as impossibly stubborn and unyielding as the granite rocks beneath his boots. He had raised her for a handful of pivotal, formative years before the harsh demands of life had yanked her abruptly elsewhere. She remembered the sharp, clean smell of sagebrush clinging to his coat, the steady creak of his worn leather chair by the fire, the endless stories he told about the land, and the secrets he swore the mountain kept hidden. "He passed 2 winters ago," the rider continued, his tone flat. "Complications delayed the final deed transfer. You're the last living heir. His property is yours now." Clara nearly laughed. A dry, rasping sound. Elias Ward had not been wealthy, not even close. His homestead had been little more than a collapsing cabin pressed precariously into the side of Lone Mesa, a barn hardly fit to shelter mice, and a stubborn, half-wild Mustang he'd sworn the county would never take. But a roof, even a dying, desperate one, was still a roof. She signed the receipt with hands already roughened by years of relentless wandering. When the writer finally rode away, the envelope felt impossibly heavy in her palm, weighted not by paper, but by obligation and potential danger. Eli tugged her sleeve. "Ma, where is it?" Clara opened the letter slowly, almost expecting it to dissolve like a desert mirage. Inside was a formal deed granting her ownership of Ward's Bluff, a secluded, unforgiving piece of land north of Lone Mesa. There was also a handwritten warning scrawled sharply across the back flap. Asterisk main cabin standing, outbuilding condemned. Do not ignore. Her grandfather's scrawl, sharp, familiar, deeply unsettling. Clara exhaled, the tension easing marginally. "We're going home," she murmured, though she wasn't sure the land had ever genuinely felt like home. By noon, they had gathered their few belongings. The same patched bedroll, the same 2 tin cups, the same battered satchel. They traded the last of their pitiful coins for 2 crowded seats on a supply wagon heading west. The land unfurled before them as they rode. Sprawling, sun-baked plains, jagged cliffs that looked like broken teeth, and cottonwoods bending low and exhausted in the ceaseless wind. Eli leaned against her arm, half dozing as the wagon rattled relentlessly over the hard, rutted earth. "You think the place is safe?" he asked quietly. Clara hesitated only a moment. "Safe enough for us to rest," she said. "And that's more than we've had in years." They reached the base of Ward's Bluff late that afternoon. With the supply wagon long gone, swallowed by the plains, Clara and Eli trudged up the narrow, winding trail carved into the hillside. The air tasted raw of dust and sharp, aromatic juniper. Shadows began crawling swiftly over the land as the sun dipped behind the monumental rock face. Then Clara saw it. The cabin, or what pitifully remained of it. The main roof sagged dramatically like a tired, broken mule. The porch had long ago collapsed into a nest of splintered planks. One shutter clung to the window frame by a single, rusted hinge, creaking mournfully with every breath of wind that touched the bluff. But the stone foundation beneath it still stood firm, as stubborn and enduring as the man who had built it. "It's not much," Eli whispered, disheartened. "No," Clara agreed softly, a strange ache in her chest. "But it's ours now." They pushed open the front door. Dust swirled in the last few beams of light filtering through the grime. The air smelled of old, decaying timber, cold ashes, and something faintly sweet, sage perhaps, or a memory. The interior was nearly untouched, frozen in time. Elias's leather rocking chair sat faithfully beside the cold hearth. His dented tin coffee pot rested on the stove. A blanket she remembered from childhood lay neatly folded on the cot, faded almost white. Something inside her chest tightened painfully. Memories she had meticulously buried years ago stirred like hot embers catching the wind. As Eli began to tentatively explore the small, single room, Clara noticed a folded paper tucked onto the mantel, her grandfather's familiar handwriting again. Asterisk, if you're reading this, the mountain still remembers you, and you must follow what it shows. Her breath quickened, a cold prickle running along her arms. Elias always spoke as if the land itself were alive, as if it listened, as if it held grudges or kept promises. Clara had learned over the years that the mountain did hold something. If not grudges, then deep, valuable secrets. Before she could unfold the note further, a sound outside made Eli gasp sharply. "Ma, someone's out there." Clara's heart hammered as she rushed to the doorway. A large shape moved across the yard. It was a horse, but no ordinary ranch pony. A massive chestnut-brown Mustang with a distinctive silver streak down its muzzle. Her grandfather's famed, stubborn Mustang, still alive. The animal approached slowly, eyes steady and intelligent, ears pricked forward as if recognizing a ghost. "Ma, is that his?" Clara nodded, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. "His name is Rust. Elias said he'd outlive us all." Rust nudged her gently. Then his powerful head dipped toward the note still clutched in her hand, snorting softly as if urging her to read the rest. Clara unfolded the paper. Asterisk, if Rust finds you, follow him. He remembers what I couldn't tell you. A cold, sudden breeze swept across the bluff. Rust turned deliberately and began walking toward the tree line behind the cabin, glancing back once to ensure she was following. "Ma," Eli whispered, fear coating his voice. "Where's he going?" Clara swallowed hard, her decision already made. "To something my grandfather hid," she said, her voice firm. "Something the county never believed, and something someone else may want kept buried forever." She gripped Eli's hand tightly. "Get your jacket. We're going with him." As they stepped toward the darkening woods, Clara felt it. A pressure, like hidden eyes on them, watching from somewhere just beyond the trees. The mountain was holding its breath, and whatever Elias Ward had desperately tried to hide, it was waiting. Rust led them deeper into the woods behind the cabin, his hooves thudding softly on old pine needles and damp earth. The sun had completely dipped behind the mesa, staining the western sky and dyeing unsettling shades of gold and angry purple. Clara felt Eli's small fingers clutch her sleeve tighter with each step. The trees grew denser, forming a black canopy that seemed to swallow the last vestiges of light. For a terrifying moment, Clara wondered if she had made a terrible, fatal mistake. Following a half-wild Mustang into a remote forest at dusk was not the choice a sensible, cautious woman made in this territory. But Elias Ward had never been simple or predictable. If he had left this strange message for her, it meant something immense, something vital. Rust stopped abruptly at a small clearing. At its center sat a low, squat stone structure no bigger than a shed, hunched heavily under the weight of tangled vines and accumulated time. An opening in the earth sat beside it, looking disturbingly like a fresh wound. Eli stepped closer, pointing. "That's the condemned building." Clara nodded slowly. "That's the one." It looked ancient, far older than the cabin, older than any flimsy shack she'd ever seen. The door hung crooked on rusted hinges, claw-marked and gouged by generations of wind and weather. Clara tried to imagine her elderly, frail grandfather alone, struggling to drag crates or tools out here. The thought made her chest tighten with protective grief. Rust snorted sharply and pawed the ground once. "He wants us inside," Eli whispered, his breath shallow. Clara exhaled, forcibly pushing back her rising fear. "Stay close." She pressed her shoulder against the door. It groaned open, releasing a breath of profoundly cold, stale air. Inside was a heavy, absolute darkness. Waiting, Clara raised her small oil lantern. The flame flared, casting the stone walls in trembling, uncertain light. Eli inhaled sharply, a sound of pure astonishment. "Ma, look." Wooden crates, dozens of them, stacked nearly to the low rafters, each marked with an insignia that even the relentless march of time and dust hadn't erased. * Red Hawk Mining Company. Clara frowned deeply. Red Hawk had been gone for nearly 20 years. Bankrupt, swallowed by scandal after half its engineers vanished and its ledgers conveniently burned in a massive warehouse fire. What would they want with this place? She murmured, sweeping the lantern beam across the stacks. Eli ran his fingers over the nearest crate. Maybe Grandpa worked for them. "No," Clara said firmly. "He hated mining companies. He always said they stole more from the land than they ever gave back." She pried a rusted crowbar from the wall beside the door and wedged it under a crate lid. It took her 3 stubborn, breathless attempts before the wood finally gave way, snapping open with a sharp, terrifying crack that echoed in the stillness like a distant gunshot. Inside lay cylindrical metal tubes, tightly wrapped in brittle canvas, heavy, cold, and impersonal. "What are they?" Eli asked, peering over her shoulder. Clara lifted one. Her arm dipped immediately under its unexpected weight. "Core samples," she said quietly, her voice flat. "From deep underground." Her grandfather had always claimed the mining men drilled where they shouldn't, on lands they never paid for, lands they trespassed on because no one powerful enough cared to stop them. Clara set the sample down, feeling the heavy, suffocating weight of her grandfather's warnings settle onto her shoulders. Whatever he had known, whatever he'd hidden here, it had been dangerous enough to scare an entire powerful company into wholesale lies. A twig snapped outside, sudden and close. Clara spun instantly, the lantern trembling violently in her grip. Rust, who had been guarding the doorway, backed away from the shed, his large muscles taut, nostrils flaring wildly. His ears pinned flat against his head in alarm. "Ma?" Eli whispered, instinctively stepping closer to her side. Another crack, slow, deliberate, like someone placing their weight with impossible care on a dead branch. Someone watching. Clara extinguished the lantern with a swift, economical breath. Instant, absolute darkness swallowed them. "Stay behind me," she whispered fiercely, her hand finding Eli's shoulder. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears as she slipped back through the shed doorway. The night air was colder than before. Rust stood facing the trees, head low and threatening. He gave a warning, a deep, guttural rumble in his chest, the sound horses made when large predators circled too close. Clara strained her eyes. Between the trunks, something shifted. Human-shaped, tall, unmoving, watching. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice steady and loud enough to cut through the oppressive quiet. No answer, only the soft hiss of the wind slipping between the dry leaves. Clara took one challenging step forward. The figure vanished into the deep darkness without breaking a single branch. Rust snorted anxiously and nudged Clara's shoulder, urgently urging her back toward the path leading to the cabin. "Ma, let's go." Eli whispered, trembling uncontrollably. Clara grabbed the cylinder she'd opened, wrapped it tightly in her coat, and hurried toward the cabin. Rust walked beside them like a massive, bronze guardian, glancing back constantly at the tree line with every few steps. They didn't speak again until they reached the small clearing where the cabin stood. Inside, Clara bolted the flimsy door and immediately lit the stove. When warmth finally began to seep back into the room, Eli collapsed onto the cot, exhausted and shaken. "Who do you think it was?" he asked drowsily. "A drifter, or a hunter," Clara lied softly, but her heart knew better. A drifter did not stand perfectly still and watch. A hunter did not vanish without a sound. Someone knew she had come back. Someone who desperately wanted her grandfather's secret to stay buried. As the fire crackled, Clara turned the heavy metal cylinder over and over in her hands. Under the soot and time, she found small numbers stamped into the steel. Coordinates, depth, date. She felt her stomach twist into a knot of sick understanding. "Eli," she whispered, "these aren't just samples. They're proof. Proof that Red Hawk Mining drilled far outside their claimed land. Proof Elias Ward had been right. Maybe even proof worth killing for." A soft sound came from outside, the distinct, faint creak of a branch bending under unexpected weight. Clara stiffened immediately. Rust let out a low, angry whinny from the yard. "Ma," Eli whispered, terrified. Clara moved to the small window, easing the shutter open a sliver. In the moonlight, she saw nothing, only the dense, quiet woods, only shadows. But the heavy feeling of being watched lingered, massive as the mountains themselves. She turned back to Eli and knelt beside him. "We'll leave at dawn," she said. "We need answers, and someone in town might finally be willing to listen." She didn't say the rest. Asterisk before whoever is out there decides we shouldn't have come back. Rust whinnied sharply. A warning, not a greeting. Clara rose, her heartbeat hammering against her ribs. Her grandfather's secret had woken something powerful, and someone was closing in. Dawn broke pale and brittle over Ward's Bluff, painting the cold land in a fleeting gold that did nothing to settle Clara's tightening nerves. She had barely slept. Every creak the cabin made in the rising wind felt like a slow footstep just outside the door. Every thump in the woods sounded like the watcher returning. Rust stood near the porch as the sun climbed, ears constantly alert, eyes trained relentlessly on the tree line. Clara stroked his muzzle. "Guard the place," she whispered. She didn't know if the Mustang understood her, but he snorted softly and remained rooted like a sentinel carved from desert stone. Eli slung on his coat, still rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Whoever was out there last night, do you think they'll come back?" Clara glanced toward the looming tree line. "Not if we leave before they expect it." They set off down the narrow, dangerous trail that wound toward Redwater. Eli walked close, his hand often brushing hers for reassurance. The chilly morning air carried the scent of pine, dust, and something like tense anticipation. Clara had lived long enough to know when the past had begun to stir itself, ready to claim its due. Redwater was slowly waking when they arrived. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys, storefronts creaked open, and the distant rumble of a stagecoach echoed between the dusty buildings. But Clara wasn't here for supplies or rest. She had something heavier to carry today. The wrapped core sample weighed on her back like a dense stone pulled directly from the mountain itself. Their first stop was the town library, a humble, sun-bleached wooden building. Inside, sagging shelves held volumes of old books and official ledgers, and dust motes floated through the stale air like slow-moving snow. The librarian, a stern woman in her 60s with spectacles perched low on her nose, eyed Clara with quiet, practiced scrutiny. "You're new in town," she stated. "Most folks don't come in this early unless they need something specific." Clara set the heavy, cloth-wrapped cylinder on the worn desk. "I need answers." The librarian slowly unfolded the cloth, her stern expression shifting instantly to surprise. She lifted the sample, turning it thoughtfully in her hand. "Haven't seen one of these since my father worked the assays," she breathed. "This is Red Hawk work. Clara nodded, her jaw tight. Found it on my grandfather's land. Elias Ward. Recognition passed across the librarian's face like a shadow of regret. Elias. Yes, I remember him coming into town shouting about stolen claims. Folks mostly chalked it up to old age and bitterness. He wasn't wrong, Clara insisted. The librarian hesitated a long moment, then made a quick decision. Jim Dunley's your man. Used to be a company geologist before Red Hawk went under. He studies maps here on Tuesdays. She leaned close, her voice dropping conspiratorially. And he's honest, which is more than I can say for most men tied to mining. Clara's pulse quickened. Where can I find him? Right here. The librarian pointed toward the corner table where an elderly man hunched intently over a collection of brittle, massive maps. His hands, though wrinkled and aged, moved with deliberate, practiced care. Jim looked up as Clara approached. His gaze fell instantly to the metal cylinder. Is that what I think it is? Clara placed it before him. I need to know where it came from. Jim unwrapped it fully, examining the metal casing, the faded stamp, and then the exposed layers of stone. He held it up to the weak light as if reading a geological story embedded in the earth strata. Well, he muttered, shaking his head. Either someone forged this perfectly, or Red Hawk drilled on land they had absolutely no legal right to touch. Clara leaned in close. Those numbers, are they coordinates? Jim nodded grimly. Coordinates, depth, date, and this. He tapped a pale mineral streak running through the stone. Lithium-rich vein. This would have been worth an untold fortune. Enough to make a company break a few laws. Enough to make them bury whatever proof they found. Eli exhaled softly, his eyes wide with comprehension. Clara swallowed, feeling a terrible pressure in her chest. Anger mixed with painful, searing vindication. Elias Ward had been dismissed as a stubborn, rambling old man, but he had been telling the devastating truth all along. Jim leaned forward. You need someone who can turn this into a fight they can't ignore. Harper Finch. Lawyer. She's tough as desert ironwood. The lawyer's office sat inside a narrow, stark white house with a hand-painted sign reading, Harper Finch. Attorney. No appointment needed if trouble's real. Harper was in her late 30s with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She listened silently as Clara recounted everything, from the strange deed transfer to the collapsing shed to the terrifying watcher in the woods. When Clara finished, Harper rolled the core cylinder thoughtfully in her hands. This, she stated, is the kind of evidence that makes mining executives lose serious sleep. She slid a contract across the table. I work on contingency. If we win, I take a cut. If we lose, you owe nothing but my time. But I'll warn you, companies like Red Hawk didn't stay alive this long by playing fair or by following rules. Clara steadied her breath, meeting the lawyer's gaze squarely. I'm not afraid of a fight. Good, Harper replied, signing her name with a flourish. Because you just stepped into one. Word spread quickly through Redwater. People whispered in doorways. Some offered genuine sympathy. Others muttered darkly that Clara was stirring up trouble that should have stayed buried deep. After meeting with Jim again to prepare detailed affidavits, Clara and Eli walked toward the livery to rent a horse for the ride home. That's when she noticed him. A man leaning casually against a lamppost near the saloon. Tall, wearing a dark, expensive coat, his hat tugged low over his eyes. He wasn't reading a newspaper. He wasn't watching the general street traffic. He was watching her. Clara felt the exact same cold, nauseating prickle she had felt in the woods the night before. Eli, she said quietly, her voice barely audible. Stay close. They continued walking. The man didn't move, didn't follow, but his eyes tracked them all the way down the street until they reached the edge of town. Harper caught up to them, striding quickly. You see him? She murmured, without looking back. You know him? Clara asked. No, Harper said, her voice hard. But I know the type. Company man, paid to watch and not talk. Professional. He's here for a reason. Clara stiffened. He was at the cabin last night. Harper cursed softly under her breath. That means they already know exactly what you found. Clara's hand tightened painfully on Eli's shoulder. What do we do now? Eli asked, his voice small. Harper looked Clara dead in the eyes. You push forward, she said, her voice unwavering. When mining companies start prowling around a widow and her child, it means they're scared. And fear, Clara. Fear means leverage. The Mustang Rust was waiting anxiously when they returned to the bluff at dusk. He paced the yard, agitated, as if sensing the danger trailing behind them like a dark shadow. Inside the cabin, Clara set the core sample on the table. It didn't look like much, just metal and stone. But it was enough to expose a stolen mountain, enough to shame a powerful company, enough to risk someone's life. Clara looked at Eli, then at the darkening woods beyond the window. We're not running anymore? She whispered, a fierce resolve settling over her. Eli nodded slowly, understanding the weight of her commitment. Grandpa would want us to finish what he started. The wind pressed against the windows, rattling them softly. Somewhere beyond the trees, a small branch snapped, unnervingly close. Clara quickly snuffed the lamp and stood very still. They were not alone on Ward's Bluff, and Red Hawk Mining knew exactly where to find them. Night soaked into Ward's Bluff like ink spreading across damp paper. Clara stood at the single window long after Eli had finally fallen into a troubled sleep, watching the tree line for any movement, any sign. The cabin walls creaked in the cooling wind, but beneath that natural sound, she sensed something else. An unnatural stillness, like the very land was waiting for something crucial to break. Rust stood sentinel right outside the door, refusing to settle. His ears flicked constantly, his tail swishing with deep agitation. Clara had seen horses frightened before, but this was different. He wasn't afraid. He was guarding. When dawn finally brushed pale, cold light over the mesa, Clara hadn't slept a single minute. Eli stirred, rubbing his tired eyes. Did anything happen? No, Clara said softly, pulling on her coat. But today everything starts. They saddled Rust and began the descent back into Redwater. Harper had sent a short note the evening before. The company had already responded to the affidavit. They wanted a meeting. Not in court, not in public, behind closed doors, which was the first clear sign that Red Hawk Mining, powerful, secretive, and utterly ruthless, was running scared, afraid. When Clara and Eli stepped into Harper Finch's compact, overheated office, the tension was immediate. Harper's expansive mahogany desk was buried beneath an avalanche of legal documents, the papers threatening to spill onto the floor. In the far corner, Jim Dunley was hunched over his geological findings, his maps and core samples strewn across the floor like the scattered remnants of a decisive battle. Harper, sharp and efficient, wasted no time on pleasantries. They flinched, she declared, her voice cutting through the thick quiet, as she propelled a thick, formal document across the table. They are offering a settlement, a monumental one. Clara scanned the figure, a dizzying sequence of zeros that stole her breath. This was more than money. It was freedom, enough to purchase a ranch twice the expanse of Ward's Bluff, enough capital to safeguard Eli's future 100 times over. Though her pulse hammered against her ribs, Clara kept her voice level. What is the price for this silence? Harper leaned back, assessing her client. Mineral rights, she stated. Highly limited. They commit to deep subterranean drilling, far below the surface layer. They will not touch the water table, and that is ironclad. She tapped the document with a polished nail. And, Harper continued, jabbing the paper forcefully with her index finger, I stipulated that they must drop any non-disclosure agreement. You remain free to tell your story, Clara. The whole story. Clara let out a long, shuddering breath. The mining company had desperately sought to buy their silence, and Harper had snatched that crucial leverage away. But if we refuse, Harper warned, her gaze serious, we go to trial. We might gain everything, or we might lose the cabin, the land, and the little we have left. Justice in these parts, she added grimly, is rarely kind to a woman challenging a corporation, or to the actual truth. Jim Dunley shifted in his seat, his eyes blazing with conviction. Your grandfather saw this coming, Clara. He tried to warn them. These core samples prove he wasn't wrong. But this settlement? It proves they are genuinely panicked that the full scope of their deception is about to break into the light. Clara gazed down at Eli. His young face was a mirror of fear and budding hope. Was this payout the true measure of victory that Elias Ward deserved? Or would she be compromising his fierce legacy by accepting this compromise? Harper, sensing the struggle, offered counsel. Justice isn't always found in outright victory, Clara. Sometimes, fighting means forcing justice into a shape that allows you and your son to survive and build a life. Clara swallowed hard, the rough fabric of her life flashing before her. The brittle glass of the cabin's windows, the roof that sagged like a defeated old man's shoulders, Eli's perpetually worn boots, the gnawing hunger, and the constant draining worry etched into every day. Elias wouldn't have wanted them to sacrifice their future for a moral stand. He simply wanted someone to finally hear his truth. And now the world was listening. Clara gave a decisive nod. We'll take it. Harper didn't allow herself a celebratory smile. This was not a moment for triumph, but for somber resolve. Instead, she offered a firm nod of respect. Then let's execute the documents, she urged. Before their terror subsides and they manage to change their minds, the news of the settlement ripped through the dusty town like a prairie fire. Some townsfolk clapped Clara on the back, offering muttered congratulations. Others groused that she had needlessly stirred up trouble where none was needed. But one inescapable fact unified them. Red Hawk Mining had been compelled to pay a massive sum, and in this valley, payment was synonymous with guilt. As Clara and Eli gathered their coats, preparing to finally leave Harper's protective sphere, the office door flew open with a sharp, unexpected bang. A tall, silhouette-like figure in a long black coat stood framed in the doorway. The Watcher. Clara reacted instantly, pulling Eli protectively behind her. Harper stepped forward, her lawyer's authority fully engaged. You are trespassing. State your business or remove yourself immediately. The man slowly raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. Miss Boone, he said, his voice surprisingly soft. I only want to speak. Clara fixed him with a cold, unforgiving stare. You were outside my cabin, hiding in the dark. His jaw tightened marginally. My name is Daniel Carter. I was a company man. Clara's voice was arctic. A hired monitor. Carter nodded, a flicker of genuine shame crossing his features. They sent me to observe the situation, to ensure things didn't escalate. By following a single woman and her child deep into the woods. Harper snapped, outraged. It was never meant to terrify anyone. Carter insisted, his gaze direct. And I swear I never intended any harm. But after witnessing the lengths the company was willing to go, I tendered my resignation yesterday. A profound silence enveloped the room. I needed to tell you, Carter continued, his voice barely a whisper, that what you did, bringing this to the surface, it matters. Your grandfather was not a madman. He was absolutely right. I saw the old ledgers myself, proof of their knowledge. Clara's throat tightened, choked by sudden emotion. Why? Why tell me now? Because the truth doesn't perish simply because a corporation tries to bury it. Carter responded quietly. Someone needed to say it to your face. He tipped the brim of his hat, turned, and disappeared down the sunlit street. Clara watched his departure, unsure if forgiveness was possible, but recognizing instantly that a definite danger had finally evaporated. 2 months later, Ward's Bluff no longer carried the desolate air of abandonment. The roof gleamed with new shingles. The porch boasted a fresh expanse of pale cedar planks. New, crisp shutters framed the windows, and where ruin once stood, a sturdy new barn provided solid shelter from the relentless winter wind. Clara stood on the porch one golden evening, observing Eli. He was meticulously feeding Rust carefully sliced pieces of apple. He likes being home, Eli stated, his voice full of contentment. We all do, Clara replied, her voice soft with gratitude. The tale of the settlement had traveled far, drawing attention from neighboring valleys. People often drove up the dirt track just to see the small mountain that had successfully defied a global mining giant. Harper was a frequent visitor, bringing paperwork, discussing water conservation rights, and land boundary precedents. Jim Dunley, dedicating his time, helped Clara establish a small, reverent exhibit inside the old, thick-walled stone shed, displaying the crucial core samples and narrating the tragic, vindicated story of Elias Ward. On the shed's heavy door, Jim had meticulously carved a plaque, Elias Ward, Keeper of Truth. Beneath it, the simple, powerful inscription, early, not wrong. School children were now regular visitors, arriving on field trips. Farmers and ranchers stopped by to offer quiet nods of respect to the memorial. Even the cynical townspeople who had once dismissed Elias now spoke of him with genuine pride, rewriting him back into the essential lore of the county. One twilight evening, as the sun began its final descent behind Lone Mesa, painting the high desert rocks in a searing orange fire, Clara and Eli sat together on the porch, sipping warm mugs of cocoa. "Ma," Eli murmured, leaning into her shoulder. "Are we rich now?" Clara smiled, pulling him closer. "Rich enough," she assured him, "to ensure this land stays safe forever, and rich enough to choose exactly who we want to be." He leaned against her shoulder, comfortable and secure. "Do you think Grandpa would be proud?" Clara looked out across the quiet expanse of the woods, the cabin seemingly breathing in soft harmony with the rising breeze. "I think," she whispered, "he'd be proud of us both." Rust whinnied softly, nudging Eli's hat playfully. The boy laughed. A clear, joyful sound that traveled across the bluff, settling gently into the land that had once known only desolate silence. The wind shifted, turning warm and soft, feeling like the mountain itself was exhaling after holding its breath for far too long. "We are home," Eli whispered, a statement of profound realization. Clara squeezed his hand tightly. "Yes," she confirmed, gazing at the darkening horizon. "For the very first time in our lives, we are truly home." Epilogue: The mountain remembers. Spring arrived early at Ward's Bluff that year, ushering in a cleansing warmth. The snow melted into thin, silver streams cascading down the slopes, and tenacious wildflowers burst through the soil, reclaiming the territory with vibrant eagerness. Clara stood by the refurbished stone shed, her fingers tracing the deeply engraved words on the plaque. The morning sun warmed the ancient rock, and for the first time in countless years, she felt no crushing weight on her shoulders, only serene peace. Eli came sprinting from the barn, Rust trotting closely behind him, the old horse moving with an almost youthful exuberance that belied his age. The boy's laughter echoed sweetly off the mesa walls. "Ma!" he shouted. The school teacher asked if she could bring the students up again next week. Clara's smile was radiant. "Of course. This land belongs to all of us now." She looked across the expansive, open field where the tall grass swayed like a slow, emerald tide. The mountain stood majestic and silent, yet she no longer feared its quiet reserve. Silence, she had learned, was often the keeper of truth and memory, patiently waiting for the right ears to listen. The settlement funds had secured their financial future, but it was the reclaimed land that anchored their souls. The cabin, once damaged and forsaken, now pulsed with life. It was a place for building, for lasting roots, a place that had chosen them just as strongly as they had chosen it. Eli joined her by the shed, staring up at his great-grandfather's powerful name. "Do you think he knows?" he asked, quiet awe in his voice. Clara rested a loving hand on his shoulder. "I think he never once doubted that we'd find our way back." A warm current of air drifted through the pines, carrying the clean, sharp scent of sage and damp earth. Rust lifted his noble head, his ears flicking, as if acknowledging a presence that remained unseen. Clara smiled. The mountain had held its painful secrets for too long. Now it sheltered her family instead. And for the first time, Clara understood completely the profound truth Elias Ward had always preached. Land remembers who fights for it. She took Eli's hand, and together they walked toward the bright, open promise of the new day. Their new life awaited them, resting securely on the porch of the home they had finally, fully reclaimed. If you enjoyed the story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable Western tale where destiny and courage collide in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider to hype our video to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.